Paul Atkinson, you're the managing director of the insurance group of Corns & Company.
Yes.
Tell us a little bit about Corns & Company.
Corns & Company is an interesting company. It was set up in 1861 by an Englishman, Frederick Corns, and is, to our knowledge, is still the oldest foreign company in Japan. So there's some proof that foreign companies can have a history in Japan. It's a trading company and an insurance and maritime company within the group, primarily trading. Originally, the trading company was set up to trade in silk and tea in 1861, and because there was no insurance industry in Japan at the time, in 1864 it became an insurance agent. And in 1868 it became Lloyd's agent for claim settling, and still is today.
How many employees in Japan?
In total 850, and on the insurance and maritime side is about 85 people, excluding we outsource the HR and administration and IT to an internal group company. So purely doing insurance and maritime is about 85 people, and on the commercial insurance side about 20 people.
It's traditionally been quite difficult for American companies just to establish operations in Japan for a number of reasons. How do you feel that is going today? Can companies come in without too many barriers to entry?
Yeah, I personally believe that Japan is a relatively open market and welcomes foreign investment. I think the barriers to trade, by industry segment, there are obviously some segments that seem to be a little bit more protected than others. But more often than not, the barriers are cultural rather than legal. But I think one of the issues for coming to Japan is not a spontaneous or quick market. It's not a place where you can make a quick buck in a year or two. You have to be long term. And I believe that the reason why many companies fail is that their strategies in setting up in Japan are too short. So they may think, give themselves a 2 to 3 year deadline to turn a profit. Probably 5 years would be more realistic. And I think where you see that companies have stuck with the business and have put committed resources and recruited good people in Japan, they've been very successful. And in Georgia you have Aflac, which is a hugely successful company in Japan and makes more revenue in Japan than it does in the USA. And on the general insurance side, which is my industry, AIG is the leading insurance company for foreign insurers and has been many years in Japan a very successful company.
Georgia has wonderful ties with Japan. We have some 300 companies from Japan located here in one way or another, and Georgia was kind of out in front in terms of welcoming Japanese companies, and I think that there's been some cultural affinities. Some of the problems here have dealt with local employees working for Japanese managers, and I'm wondering how that operates in Japan. Do you have, are you aware of difficulties with Japanese employees and overseas managers?
Again, I think a lot of the issues where they become issues are due to cultural misunderstanding. Japan traditionally, and I think things are changing, has been a male-dominated industry in many ways for employment. Most of the senior managers are male. It's been hierarchical traditionally. People come in young and they move up slowly. Year by year they'll get promoted, and you can expect that at 35 years old you'll be at a certain stage, and at 45 years old you should be at a different stage. And it's probably traditionally much less flexible than you would see in the United States. If you come in as a European or an American to Japan and expect to run your company as a European or American company, you're going to face some difficulties because the staff you employ, the Japanese staff you employ, will have their own views of how a company should be run in Japan. So I think you need to be sensitive to the cultural differences and try and get the best from both sides.
We hear a lot about the aging of Japanese population. Is that a concern of companies operating in Japan now?
I think it's a concern for the government because we have a quite extensive social security system. We have a state pension plan, state medical, and unemployment as well. It's funded mainly by the government, and therefore the costs of who is going to be able to pay for that scheme as the majority become old and there are fewer younger people in the workforce is common everywhere, but it's particularly acute in Japan because we're probably closer to having a larger portion of the population who are retired or semi-retired. But I think there are also opportunities for foreign companies. Because of that, there is a large a volume, a number of people who have good business experience but who are no longer working. But in Japan, at 60 years old, you're still relatively young. I mean, people live long in Japan. The ladies live into their 80s and the men well into their late 70s. So there are many people who take on a second role after they've retired, often with foreign companies, and can bring their experience to those companies.
A Georgia company that's interested in going into Japan, which is still the second largest economy in the world, what should it be most sensitive about on the cross-cultural side, and how do they clear those hurdles?
I think Japanese appreciate honesty, respect, politeness, and generally a non-aggressive nature. The legislation for a Georgian company or any company setting up in Japan, I think you need to be aware that things often seem to be frustratingly slow. There is a history of companies coming into the Japan market, being there for 2 or 3 years, not succeeding and leaving. So Japanese are long-term by nature. Their strategic thinking is very long-term. They're not so concerned about quarterly results, analysts, in the way that the States or the UK might be, for example. But they're long-term, their strategy is long-term, and they expect their partners to be there long-term.
What is your motivation for coming to this meeting of the Assurex Global Partners? What do you look for in spending the time here? Okay,
well, Assurex is an association of independent agents. We are independent. We only work in Japan. Our Japan market is our home turf, and we like to think that we're specialists for that market. But what we find is when we come to the Partners Conference, and this time it's in Atlanta, firstly it's a good opportunity to travel to somewhere new and meet new people. It's my first time in Atlanta, and it's a great city, very, very beautiful and green city. But people are very friendly. And then meeting the partners, it's an opportunity to share business concerns, business opportunities, networking. And I found personally that many of these meetings abroad, the networking part of the conference is the most important part, and it leads to business in the future. I think as an independent in Japan, if we don't have the support of that network worldwide, it's very hard for us to compete with multinational insurance brokers. So we see it as also a support network. We can be part of that support. We have more than 100 foreign clients through networks that we work with that are investing in Japan, and we've been able to help by placing the insurances in Japan. Japan is a territory that requires local policies. It's not a totally free market in insurance, so there is a requirement for a foreign company to take out insurance in Japan, and we help the network to do that.